It is the Martha Zoller Show, and it is so great to have back in the studio here with us Justin Giboney from the AND campaign. Justin, thank you so much for coming and visiting with us.
Always glad to be here, Martha. Thanks for having me.
So give us an update on the AND campaign. Tell people what it is and what you're working on right now.
Sure. The AND campaign is a Christian civic organization, and we are in the middle of our civic revival tour. So we're going all around the country to churches, conventions, things like that, and giving people 10 disciplines that'll help Christians get through this election cycle in a constructive way, regardless of who you're voting for, to get through it in a constructive way that glorifies God.
So what are some of those disciplines?
So one of them is seeing people and not political abstractions. You know, everybody is more than their vote. And so even if you disagree with their vote, you still need to see the human dignity within them. Another one is having media hygiene, making sure that you're listening to diverse voices that are credible and intellectually honest, so that when you make a decision, you actually have good information to make it with.
You know, it's funny you mentioned the media hygiene, because I was telling folks that we had a little family gathering this weekend, and we have a very diverse group of people within our family. My sons vote Libertarian. My daughter's fairly liberal. My husband and I are pretty conservative. His parents are pretty conservative. It's a pretty diverse group of people. And I would say my sons are very conservative. They just think the government should be out of our business, and that's why they vote Libertarian. They think there's not a role for government to play. And their big argument is, name one good thing the government's done in the last 20 years that they haven't spent too much or wasted money or gotten too involved in people's businesses. And so I understand that, and I understand that thought process there. But I always tell them when they send me, because they're always sending me little clips of whatever, an article they see, whatever. And I always say, look, while I have my own problems with the mainstream media, if I have never heard of a news source, then probably we need to dig a little deeper on the story that you get. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and usually I start with kind of a Google search or whatever you use, DuckDuckGo, whatever the search engine, Safari, use a little search, and then I sort it by date. Okay, this is just a little trick to teach y'all. And that way you can see, is this the same story that's been put out 14 times? Or is it actually new reporting? That helps you find that. And I know it's a little harder because people want a 30-second clip that's going to explain everything to them. But most issues are not that way.
Yeah, most issues aren't that way. And unfortunately, I think all of us want kind of confirmation bias. And so we don't necessarily look diligently into the credibility of the source if they're saying what we want to hear sometimes. And we can all fall victim to that. So in addition to saying, okay, is this a credible source, making sure you're getting different sources, because I think you and I could agree, too, that there's some mainstream sources that on certain issues probably shouldn't be taken for their word. So it's just getting a variety and make sure you're doing your due diligence.
Well, for example, earlier I was talking about the votes this weekend on foreign aid, and I was using a New York Times source, which I know a lot of my listeners don't like the New York Times, and I think their editorial page is too far left, okay? But when it comes to charts and graphs, there's nobody better than the New York Times. Yep. Plus, you can actually search the New York Times database for more information than almost any other source of a newspaper. So there are certain things. I think their editorial page is too far left and they don't have enough diverse voices. I think that's my viewpoint on that. But many times when it comes to covering actual, especially live events, they do a really good job of sorting it out so that you can get a good snapshot of what happened.
Yeah, I agree with that. I know some people who write for the New York Times, and they can do a good job. To your point, when it comes to the editorial space, I have some disagreements. But again, whether it's New York Times, Washington Post, or any other, just making sure you get a variety of views and then trying to take what you want to be the truth out of what the actual facts are.
Well, and our old friend from GPB, Robert Jemison, also works at New York Times now, he was doing obituaries, and now he's in real political reporting. So he's very happy about that. And it's good for me to see people that are long-term journalists, whether it's him or Matt Brown, who used to be with the Washington Post, who now is with AP. You know, there are people out there that are still doing old school journalism. They're just hard to find because of this kind of Snapchat minute that we're in, or the TikTok minute that we're in, where people just want to go through. And I actually did go on TikTok for a minute this last fall because I wanted to see what it was about just for myself. But right after the attacks on October 7th, I started getting really, really offensive content that was just showing up in my feed. And you know what? I said, I don't need this in my life. This is too destructive, and so I turned it off.
I did the same for different reasons, but I did the same earlier when it came to TikTok because there's a lot of interesting stuff on there, and it can be kind of just weird and addictive, like you're going down a hole kind of. And so, yeah, I just finished reading Walter Cronkott's biography, and it really brought some of those journalistic principles to bear and made me think through that.
Yeah, and Walter Cronkite did a 15-minute newscast. I think it went to 30 minutes, but that was back in the day when news didn't have to turn a profit. Okay, news is not what drove the profit of the broadcast companies. It was entertainment that drove the profit, and the news was like a public service at that point in time. Then something happened around the 80s to where they started things like they started making money on things like 60 Minutes, the magazine shows, and that kind of thing. And then they crossed the Rubicon, and the news department started to have to turn a profit. And I don't think profit is bad in general. I mean, profit drives a lot of things. But in this case, what happened was, and then 24-hour news, where you don't have, it just became this beast that had to be fed all the time. And because of that, about 40% of first reports are incorrect.
Yeah, you have to watch out for that. And that's why I think it is good to mix. I do like to mix some of the mainstream media with some independent sources. Now, there are independent sources that are not credible at all, and then there are others with some people who have come from different places that are pretty good. So, again, it's making sure that you're being diligent and that you're getting at least different points of view. I think that's helpful.
So we're in the middle of this political campaign, and we look like we're going to have the same matchup. I still think, a lot can happen between now and the conventions. I think we're pretty solid on the Republican side that it's going to be Trump. I think Robert Kennedy's going to get on enough ballots to make some sort of impact. I don't know what that's going to be. I think Jill Stein's coming to Atlanta. She usually is able to get on the ballot in a number of states with the Green Party. You got Cornel West trying to get on the ballot. And then you've got whoever the Libertarian candidate's going to be. I think Joe Biden, while he's got the delegates, all of that, I still think it's a little bit of a question mark whether, with the convention being so late, whether he'll ultimately be the nominee. But I think that's less likely than it maybe was a few months ago. I think he wants it. I think he wants to keep running. But what you're seeing in the numbers is this really interesting stuff, is that there's younger people that are saying they like Trump better than they like Biden. There's people of color saying they like Trump better than they like Biden. And it's very interesting to me because they're both really flawed people, I think. But I guess we all are.
Yeah, there's been some movement there. So I think when it comes to Biden, barring a major health crisis, I think he becomes the nominee. It's hard for me to see them push him out. I just, being in Democratic circles,
folks.
don't see.
Yeah.
I don't see the push for that. In fact, most folks are trying to convince others that all the
he's really sharp in a room by himself.
The competence issues aren't real. That's where I see people spending most of their time. Now, Chicago's a different. Being that it's in Chicago and being that Chicago is in an uproar on a lot of different things, that could be an interesting convention. Exactly. Yeah. Well, that's where I was going to go. That could be a very interesting convention. But you are seeing kind of a shift of people to Trump, at least for now. Now, we know that Trump has some other issues, and some of these folks that are shifting over there, if he's actually prosecuted, may not be there. But we'll just have to see. There's so many other things.
And it's so funny where you would think it would be a benefit for Biden that he can be out there campaigning right now, and Trump is in a courtroom for 6 weeks. Mm-hmm. But then Biden goes out and tells this crazy story about how his uncle was shot down and they never recovered the body because, there's a lot of cannibals in New Guinea. And I'm like, really? Come on. Why would he think that was a good story to tell? And then the Pentagon, of course, there's a record of this. It's not that they came out with a statement, but they've made statements before about this loss. And basically his plane went down in the ocean. So it's just not true.
Yeah. Biden has.
Now, we know family lore can be something, though,
Biden has a history of embellishment. We'll call it that. He's just not going to get rid. Like, that's just what he's been doing for a long time. and he's just going to keep doing that. The other thing, when you talk about the trials and the issue, a reason it might not be hitting Trump the way that it could be hitting him, is you just have some overreach. I mean, if you look at what's going on in New York, it's just like, oh, you're going to give him his bail, set it at a level that nobody could ever pay. People are just like, come on, guys. Like, and so things that overreach, even if some of the cases are legitimate, that overreach, I think, is helping him in ways that some
Are
might
you
not
a lawyer
expect.
by training? Do I
Yes.
remember that? Okay.
Yeah.
So my lawyer friends, and really I've gone to my more liberal lawyer friends to talk to them about this. They're all pretty much in agreement that they think a lot of these cases are big-time overreach, that no one else would have been tried but him for this kind of stuff, and that it looks bad for the legal system.
I think it does look bad. Now, my opinion is the New York case seems like overreach. That's one that when you talk about discretion, it probably could have been used otherwise, and it makes it seem political. I think the case in Georgia is a little more legitimate. People might disagree there. I think there is some legitimacy to that. But either way, there's so much going on around these cases that it doesn't hit Trump in the way that it could unless he gets prosecuted, because it still seems like there's a number of people saying, I don't think I could go that far.
We're talking to Justin Giboney from the AND campaign, and when we come back, we're going to talk more about the AND campaign and what we can do to really make a difference in people's lives. And it might not be government. It might just be how we act. We'll be back. It is the Martha Zoller Show, and I'm here with Justin Giboney, and that's Ro Khanna that is talking to the guy that's leaving the FDA as head of the FDA and just kind of saying, hey, will you commit that you won't become a lobbyist, somewhere down the road? And the rule in the federal government is 2 years. But we were talking on the break, Justin Giboney and I are here, Justin's with the AND campaign. We were talking on the break that, this level of humility and this level of standards and people, that are good people just aren't out there anymore. They are in public service so they can make money later. Okay, and I'm not naming any names. You all know someone who does, and that's kind of the way it is. So I wanted to ask the question, and with the work you do with the AND campaign, what do you guys see as the biggest issues that we're dealing with? And then what are some answers? And I know they may not be governmental.
That's a good question. So to us, there's some really big issues out there. I think you have to look at the economy, housing, food prices is something that's really challenging for a lot of people, whether or not someone will admit it or not. It has to be dealt with, and so we look at that. We also, as you know, we have our whole life committee where we do look at abortion and believe in the sanctity of life, but also say that we have to care about the woman and the child. I think too often we tend to push one away and just focus on the other, but these things come together, and that really is really important. And then something I've been hitting on quite a bit, poverty in general, but also parental rights. I mean, there in certain states, not as much as in Georgia, but in certain places, parental rights are really at stake. And so these are religious liberty issues also. And so those are some of the things that we do. But when you're talking about some of these issues, you got to look locally first. They used to say that all politics are local, and now all politics are national. And what we're trying to get people to do is say, what can you do in your local community? Because I know when it comes to the presidential election, a lot of people are kind of feeling powerless. Their vote doesn't matter. I think your vote does matter. But even bigger than that, I believe that what you and your community, your church or whatever do for the people around you could actually have a bigger impact on your community than who becomes the president.
So I've been saying to people that the three things you need to do is 1, vote, 2, parent your children or grandchildren, and 3, start having more face-to-face conversations with people, real people, and just kind of strike up conversations. My kids always joke about the fact, are you going to strike up a conversation with a stranger again? Well, yeah, I'm probably going to do that. That's what I do. Okay. I like to talk to people. If I'm in line, if I come across someone, whatever, I like to talk to people. I know that's a little bit, like, I don't know, old lady. I don't know. But I don't know what it is, but I like to do it. I'm interested in people. I like different kinds of people. So I think we're in a place. I'm glad you brought up the parental rights, and later on in the week, we're going to be talking about all the changes that's being proposed to Title IX and all the work that women like me have worked on through our whole lives. But later in the week, we're going to do that. Not today, but that you're right, that it's got to be on a community level. So remind people again, kind of, because you had an interesting journey, right? Because you were a Democratic activist, you worked with things, and now you're a pastor. And do the AND campaign. Just tell us a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, so I worked for the mayor of Atlanta, who obviously was a Democrat, for 7 to 8 years. I was running campaigns all over the city of Atlanta, was a delegate at the Democratic National Convention twice. And then I just realized, as when I looked at my faith and I looked at these parties, that I needed to distinguish myself. I didn't really feel comfortable on the right or the left. And so I had to say, well, what does it look like to think about love and truth in the public square, to care about justice, but also care about moral order? Because what we tend to do is we tend to say either you're all about justice or you're all about morality. But when I look at my faith, I think those are together, that they're actually interdependent. And so I just kind of went on a journey to say, what does it look like to not be so partisan or ideological, but to focus on justice and moral order, compassion and conviction?
Because you see church people, okay, and especially in the black church, I see certain values when I go there and values in my own church. And I hate to call it black church and white church, but you know what I'm saying when I say that. But you see certain values, but you don't see them played out in either party, really. Those kinds of values. They get some of them, but they don't get other ones, and it puts you in a challenge as a Christian.
Yeah, I worry about Christians that don't feel any tension being in a party. Right. If you're a Democrat and you don't feel any tension or any issue with the views on abortion or the views on other issues, or if you're a Republican, you don't feel any tension on the immigration issue or any of that, or just find some issue that makes you a little bit uncomfortable, that's problematic, because I think we have to question at that point, are we being critical thinkers, or have we kind of outsourced our public witness to a party? And so we would ask people to say, okay, you can be in a party. We're not saying you can't do that. But are you thinking based on principles rather than just the party agenda and narrative?
Yeah, and you mentioned immigration for a minute, and I think what's interesting about that is that, look, the United States of America, when they follow their laws, which right now we're not, we immigrate about 1.3 million people a year into this country, which is more than the rest of the world combined. So I don't think you can say by anybody's definition that we're anti-immigrant. Okay, as far as the law goes. But we're not following the law right now. And on top of that, you've got 2 million, I don't know what the number is, but a large number of people that are coming across the border that aren't coming in the legal way. They're coming in, and you have the terrible thing that happened to Laken Riley, and where this guy was not undocumented. Mm-hmm. He had interacted with the law in a whole bunch of places, but didn't go through with it. Yeah. So I think it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, this discussion plays out, and who can couch it in a fair way, but also a truthful way.
Yeah, and a few weeks ago, I wrote an article in Christianity Today about just that. I'm no huge fan of the way that Biden has handled immigration, but I will also say, the way that someone like Senator Ted Cruz and others have treated the issue, where they, what he did, you can even go back to what he did to Rubio in that regard. That's no way to conduct yourself. So for me, I would feel a little bit of tension based on some of the rhetoric and also the stance that some folks have taken. But we all have to, again, I think the big issue is that we all have to be willing to critique our side and not just go along to get along.
Absolutely. Justin Giboney, if people want to know more about you, how can they find that out?
You can see us at the andcampaign.org, andcampaign.org, or you can go to some of my social media at Justin E. Giboney. Justin E. Giboney.
Thank you for being with me today.
Thank you.
We're going to take a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk to Jim Hammock. He's running for sheriff, and then we'll talk to Sheriff Gerald Couch. So we've got a primary coming up, folks. Early voting starts in a week. We'll be back.